We have breaking news now at this hour. NBC News is reporting some very, very important breaking news. U.S. Ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sundland, will tell Congress on Thursday that he thought Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch of Ukraine, our Ukrainian ambassador who Donald Trump got rid of, he's going to say that he thought she was great and that he has nothing negative to say about her performance as ambassador to Ukraine, despite her removal from that job by President Trump. A person with knowledge of Sundland's testimony is telling NBC News tonight that Yovanovitch was an able and professional diplomat and that he had absolutely no issues with her whatsoever. That's a big piece of breaking news from NBC News tonight. And there's another also from NBC News. Correspondence between Fiona Hill's lawyers and White House Deputy Counsel Nicolle Purpura, obtained by NBC News, show that the White House counsel tried to limit Fiona Hill's testimony today in her closed-door deposition with the congressional impeachment investigation by raising the issue of executive privilege. They tried to impose that on her. She, of course, is a former National Security Council advisor to President Trump on Russia issues primarily. The White House did not try to block her from testifying, but according to the correspondence, the White House told Fiona Hill's lawyers that there were areas where she could not possibly testify or that would fall under executive privilege. They said that those areas were direct communications with the president, diplomatic communications, meetings with other heads of state, staffing presidential phone calls, foreign heads of state. Now, her lawyers immediately wrote back to the White House on Sunday, yesterday, day before the testimony, and said they did not believe the White House legal reasoning. And they said some of the information that has already come into the public sphere can no longer be considered privilege. And Hill's lawyers also made the legal argument that is correct, that executive privilege disappears when there's reason to believe there was government misconduct. Hill's lawyers asked the White House to add any comments they wanted to make to that, but the White House lawyers said absolutely nothing, apparently, that actually did inhibit Hill's testimony today. And there have been no reports of any of the testimony delivered to the impeachment committees about Donald Trump's dealings with Ukraine that are in any way favorable to Donald Trump. No one's coming out of those depositions saying, here's all the favorable things said for Donald Trump in those under oath depositions. Every new witness appears to be adding more corroboration for the whistleblower's complaint that started this investigation. That whistleblower's complaint said that Donald Trump was soliciting help from Ukraine in his re-election campaign by asking Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. And this is not the way that Trump followers imagined Donald Trump taking on Joe Biden. They think Donald Trump is tough enough to fight Joe Biden face to face. To be a Trump follower, a Trump voter, a Trump supporter is to be, to varying degrees, a fantasist. Some businessmen supporting Donald Trump might like to live with the fantasy that they just vote to support his giant corporate tax cuts that bankrupt the Treasury of the United States and not his racism, not his vulgarity, not his rank ignorance about every subject he ever speaks about publicly. Some Trump supporters live in a world of complete fantasy about Donald Trump himself. The fantasy that somehow Donald Trump will still get Mexico to pay for the wall. The fantasy that there will be a wall to pay for. The fantasy that Donald Trump is smarter than anyone else in politics. The fantasy that Donald Trump is a tough guy, even though he grew up a spoiled rich kid. The fantasy that Donald Trump is brave, even though he got repeated draft deferments to avoid the war of his era and has never once since then ever exhibited a single moment of bravery of any kind in his life. Still, the Trump fantasists see him as tough and brave and even thin and energetic, as they do in this video that was shown at a Trump campaign event at a Trump property in Florida. That's about the only place where people would show this video publicly. We aren't showing the video, and I noticed today that CNN hasn't been showing the video because in the video, this fantasy version of Donald Trump shoots and kills someone from NBC and someone from CNN and someone from CBS and someone from BBC News, along with many other murder victims from many other news organizations. The fantasy Trump character shoots and kills Congressman Joe Kennedy, whose grandfather was shot and killed while campaigning for president, and whose great uncle, President John F. Kennedy, was shot and killed, assassinated. In the video, the fantasy Trump kills more people than you can count, including Rosie O'Donnell, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, and of course, the fantasy Trump completes what is perhaps the most rewarding of the fantasies in this video for Trump fantasists by breaking President Barack Obama's neck and killing him. Everyone named Trump is now claiming they knew nothing about this video, including Donald Trump Jr., who was at the event where the video was shown. President Trump has, through a White House spokesperson, condemned the video after claiming he has not seen the video. What are the chances Donald Trump has not seen that video? That is code language for his followers to understand that he really doesn't condemn the video. When he tells them he's condemning the video without having seen it, he's telling them that this is just a political thing that I have to say right now about the video, which I hope you watch, and I hope you think of me this way, especially the thin part. Fantasy. So far, that is all Donald Trump has to offer in his defense in the impeachment investigation, and the fantasy is crumbling. Donald Trump's completely unqualified ambassador to the European Union, who purchased his ambassadorship through $1 million contribution to the Trump inauguration, has been subpoenaed to testify to the impeachment investigation on Thursday, and all indications are, as NBC News is reporting tonight, is that he will finally testify after being prevented from testifying by the State Department last week. Washington Post reported over the weekend what to expect in Gordon Sundland's testimony about the now famous text of his, which was a reply to an even more famous text from acting ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor, whose text said, "I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign." Records showed that it took Sundland 5 hours to respond to that text. And we now know that somewhere in those 5 hours, Gordon Sundland called Donald Trump and they discussed what to say in response to Bill Taylor's text. And that Gordon Sundland finally texted back, according to the Washington Post. And what he texted back was what Donald Trump told him to say. "Bill, I believe you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear. No quid pro quos of any kind." According to the Washington Post, that is what Donald Trump told Gordon Sundland to text Bill Taylor. The Washington Post reports, according to someone close to Sundland, quote, "Sundland plans to tell lawmakers he has no knowledge of whether the president was telling him the truth at that moment. It's only true that the president said it, not that it was the truth." Leading off our discussion tonight, our Democratic Congressman Harley Rouda of California. He's a member of the House Oversight Committee, and he was present today for all 11 hours of Fiona Hill's deposition. Also joining us, Evelyn Farkas, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Obama administration. She's an MSNBC national security analyst. And Josh Lederman is with us. He's a national political reporter for NBC News. Josh is the reporter who has broke the news tonight that we began this discussion with. And Josh, I just want to start with you because of that breaking news that you revealed to us at the beginning of this hour. These indications are that Ambassador Sondland's testimony is not going to be the kind of testimony that Donald Trump anyway wants to hear.
It's certainly going to be a different narrative than we've been hearing from Trump and the White House. And what Sundland plans to say, particularly on Marie Yovanovitch, that ambassador that President Trump recalled, he plans to say that he has only good things to say about her, that he thought she was an able, professional diplomat, had no reason to doubt her competence or qualifications for the job. So let's take stock of this, Lawrence. We now have Gordon Sundland planning to basically defend Yovanovitch. We know that Fiona Hill in her testimony today also had good things to say about Yovanovitch and her performance. So Congress is hearing a consistent message from these folks who are testifying that Yovanovitch was doing a good job, didn't have a reason to be pulled out. And that is going to raise further questions for Democrats about why she was removed, apparently as part of this plot by Rudy Giuliani to get rid of her because he thought that she was blocking what he and the president were trying to do in Ukraine.
Josh, you're reporting on the White House letters to Hill prior to her testimony, telling her about executive privilege, all these things. One of the things I noticed in your reporting that I read is that the White House lawyers tried to say to her lawyers, this is not a real impeachment inquiry.
Yeah, and it echoes some of what was in that letter that the White House lawyers sent to Nancy Pelosi just about a week ago when they were saying they're not going to comply with this impeachment inquiry. Came as there was a flurry of negotiations just in the last couple of days leading up to this testimony today between the White House lawyers and Fiona Hill's lawyers about what exactly she could say. The White House didn't go as far as to exert executive privilege and say, we don't think she can testify at all. That had been a big question, but they did lay out several areas where they said, we think this is covered by executive privilege, communications with the president, diplomatic conversations. We think that she should not be able to talk about these things. Fiona Hill's lawyers pushing back and saying, look, there's an implication here that there was wrongdoing by the government and executive privilege doesn't apply in that instant. And basically where things ended up as they headed into this very lengthy testimony today was with the White House lawyers reminding Fiona Hill and her lawyers, we advise you do not talk about anything out of school, anything that could be classified or that we consider to be covered by executive privilege.
Congressman Rouda, was it your sense that Fiona Hill had any reluctance about answering any of your questions based on those kinds of instructions from the White House?
No, I think she did an absolutely remarkable job. She was incredibly credible throughout the process, completely nonpartisan, apolitical, an uncanny ability to recall facts and meetings. And she really handled herself better than any person I've ever seen in any deposition. A true patriot, and we should all be very proud of her testimony.
And what would you say she added to your understanding of this case at this point?
It's a good question. I'm not going to go into the specifics, but I will tell you, for me personally, that her testimony today makes me further believe that we need to continue this investigation, because as we peel the layers of this onion back, one layer at a time, we are finding more and more information and evidence that demands further investigation for the American public.
And, Congressman, the closed-door nature of the depositions has been criticized by some Republicans. My understanding of it is this is kind of standard pretrial activity that takes place, certainly in civil cases and other such things, that you don't want these witnesses to be publicly sharing information through their testimony that other witnesses might then be affected by or adopt or change their stories to fit it. But does that mean at some point we will see all of Fiona Hill's testimony, or will she then be brought into a public hearing to do it again publicly?
Lawrence, you're spot on. That's exactly the point. We want to make sure that each of these witnesses that are coming through and testifying, that they're able to do that based on their knowledge and their understanding without being tainted, so to speak, by any previous testimony. So that's why we're going to do each one systematically in this process. As to whether the testimony that was provided today, as well as future and past witnesses, whether that's going to be released in its entirety or partial parts thereof, will be determined by Chairman Schiff and the other chairmen of the committee. But I would suffice it to say that once we get through this process a little bit further, you will start to see some of this evidence coming out to the general public.
Evelyn Farkas, I've never heard. Congressman Rouda is now the second member was in that deposition today who I've heard say this about Fiona Hill. Simply the best witness they've ever heard. I've never heard a senator or a member of the House say that about a witness in any hearing situation before.
Yeah, I've known Dr. Fiona Hill for many years now. She's incredibly smart. That I said the doctor thing just to give her credentials a little bit. She knows her Constitution. She probably picked some good lawyers, but she also knows Russia inside out. She knows Ukraine inside out. She knows how things are supposed to function because she's worked for multiple administrations, so she can describe when things don't function properly. I think from the media accounts, we know that she was quite angered by the renegade operation that Sundland and Rudy Giuliani and these two guys who are now in jail were running vis-a-vis Ukraine. And so she clearly had been, it sounds like she was advocating for Ambassador Yovanovitch behind the scenes. Sundland, frankly speaking, I think he's part of the cabal, if you will. I think that the president had him there watching Giuliani and these guys and trying to make sure that a deal was made. So I think he's going to tap dance to try not to implicate himself. We'll see whether he can, because he can't get away with lying, because we know those other two guys are now being deposed by the Southern District by the FBI right now, by attorneys in the FBI.
Evelyn, it feels that there's some feeling that the dam is breaking, the way witnesses who the White House was trying to block are now getting around those blocks, getting through those blocks and getting to testify. As someone who's worked inside an administration like this, you probably have a sense of what it's like for the other people who are either still inside this administration or who have left this administration, who are watching this happen, who might also have something to say themselves. Does this become contagious, this kind of willingness to step forward directly to the committee and testify?
Yes, Lawrence, and I think in a good way, because my understanding is that morale is really low, not just at the State Department, but also at the Defense Department. My successor, once removed, the woman in the job right now, she's going to be deposed. I can well imagine that for a lot of these people, it's a relief to go in there and tell an oversight body that has equal power with the executive branch what's going on, because many civil servants, most of them, I think, are truly disturbed by all of this, and they would like to go back to business as usual. And the only branch of government that can really force business as usual in this current situation looks like Congress.
Congressman Rouda, it does seem like Gordon Sundland certainly can afford the highest priced criminal defense lawyers in town to tell him exactly where his most difficult liabilities might be here in this testimony. And according to Josh Lederman's reporting tonight, it seems like he's steering away from those. He is going to be coming down solidly on the side of the ambassador who Donald Trump wanted to get rid of. He'll be in a direct conflict with Donald Trump over that, because we know in the phone call transcript that's even in there that Donald Trump going after the ambassador. We know from his own words that Donald Trump was extremely negative about this ambassador. And it sounds like he hasn't gotten any support on that point in the testimony you've heard so far. Is that correct?
Well, the key is come in and tell the truth and put country in front of party and country in front of president. And I think if he does that, he'll be fine. And I'm hopeful he'll do that. Based on the reports we're seeing, we're getting indications that he is prepared to do so. And I think if he goes that direction, the country will be very glad he did.
Congressman Harley Rouda, Evelyn Farkas, Josh Lederman, thank you all very much for starting us off tonight. I really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.